So the next session is going to be very dynamic, very interactive, and the topic that is going to be discussed is modernizing security for a multi-cloud world, lessons learned from the journey. So we have as moderator here is Justin Antonipillai, which is the founder and CEO of Wirewheel, and the former U.S. Secretary for Economic Affairs at Department of Commerce here. So he's feels home here, probably a little bit more than many of us that still try to find our way around and not get lost in this large building. The panelists, I'd like to invite them, are Andrea Vegas, which is the VP for Operations with Control Plane, and Desiree Bansee.
That's good.
Apologize. Senior Cloud Security and DevOps Engineer at IdeaCrew. The floor is yours. Please take it over.
Terrific. Well, please have a seat. First of all, thank you very much for having me here today. I'm delighted to speak with our two fantastic panelists. I had the honor of serving in this building for about 4 years through the Obama administration as part of both the Office of the Secretary, the General Counsel's Office, and then in the Economic and Statistics Administration. I'm really delighted to be back here and on such an important topic. But Andreas and Desiree, one thing I learned in this building is that the last place you want to be is between anybody in this room and lunch. So we're going to have to be very, very disciplined about our time today and make sure we're bringing some really important things to our audience, if you don't mind. I found since I left Commerce, I've been working at the confluence of identity and privacy. That's what my company does. And the entire set of issues around zero trust, because of the proliferation of incredible technology and processing capability that's now available throughout the government, but in the private sector, has been amazing in terms of what it has enabled companies to produce. Even now, when I meet with folks from the national security world or the defense world, they will say that 20, 30 years ago, you would have never been able to accomplish what you are accomplishing in the private and public sector, but now you can buy incredibly powerful processing and storage capabilities for very small amounts. And that processing capability is now available in multi-cloud environments and allows both our private sector and public sector partners to do really incredible things. And today, we're going to be speaking for a few minutes about modernizing security in a multi-cloud world. So we've already heard on topics like CI/CD pipelines and how you develop code, some of the basic infrastructure and things that the government has been releasing to enable better zero trust in the federal government. NIST is obviously leading the way in a lot of ways in that world. And here we're going to be talking about multi-cloud specifically. So before we just jump into the topic, I wanted to give you both a moment to introduce yourselves and talk for a moment about some of the specific experiences you've had, because in our short time with our colleagues here today, I'd like to focus on the practical learnings you've had in helping private companies and others implement zero trust in a multi-cloud world. So do you mind each introducing yourself? I'll start with you, Desiree.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. My name is Desiree. I have worked actually at NIST for 10 years. I was at NIST from 2011 to 2021. I was a researcher. I work on different things, 5G, speaker technology, fingerprinting. But at the end of my stay at NIST, I was working at the Office of Information and System Management. So basically, we were doing reference implementation in order to help the public sector implement guidances that NIST would put out. And I worked a lot on DevSecOps. And one thing that I really liked there was from the Air Force, they publish a DevSecOps reference design, right? So they have some really good concepts on how you would work in a setting as a company or as an institution. And one thing that I liked, for example, was they had something they call the Iron Bank, which actually is a centralized internal repository of artifacts. So let's say that you want to build a website, you need Nginx. So you would take the public image of Nginx, harden it, and then put it internally. And you only deploy images and artifacts that you know are secure. That's one thing I work on, and it was really, really interesting. But as a technology enthusiast, I'm also in a world where I teach some Navy and Marines to see how to fly and build drones. And I think some of this work can also translate in security. Yeah.
Oh, that's terrific, Desiree, and we'll come back to that in a moment. What a fantastic background, and another fellow former Department of Commerce member here too. So, Andres?
My version of that starts about a decade and a half ago, working for a company called Cisco Systems, helping companies port over their perimeter defenses to the cloud with the advent of cloud. Since then, spent a lot of time primarily as a product manager facilitating engineering outcomes to deliver differentiated security scenarios to large enterprises. Worked in companies like Cisco, very large, VMware, Hewlett-Packard, worked at a few startups, had one exit. Today, I am primarily focused on helping industries that are highly regulated, primarily critical national infrastructure and multinational banking, attain the same efficiencies. Throughout the journey, I have been very immersed in the open source community, helping accelerate those outcomes, given that, well, if the web scalers have invested thousands and thousands of human hours, have invested millions of dollars in attaining zero trust architectures, for any other organization to try to do that on their own would have an even greater cost. So how do we pull the talent? How do we pull the expertise so an organization doesn't have to start on their own, but they can do so collectively and accelerate and shorten not just the learning curve, but embark on newer and newer journeys from there on.
That's perfect as an introduction. Well, how about we jump right into it? Desiree, you have some fantastic background. You've been at NIST. You're now teaching people to fly quadcopters and airplanes. So let's start with just, based on your experience at NIST and now having implemented in the private sector and teaching people how to fly, quadcopters, tell us what you've learned and what do you think is actually the most impactful things you've seen in order to implement zero trust in an enterprise?
That is a fantastic question, Justin. I think the first thing I would say is, let's say from NIST to teaching people how to fly and build, right? Basically, if you are in a room like that and you are teaching people how to build a drone, a quadcopter, at the end of your session, not everyone will have a drone that is flying. That's a given, right? So they have access to the instructions, they have access to the instructor, but they will have a different outcome. And I see this as the same thing for like standards that you're trying to apply, right? So you will have people that will take, let's say, NIST SP 853. They will try to implement that. They will have some experts from all over the world, but at the end of the day, some parts of that will not work. And my job as someone who is teaching these kids is to be able to have a deep understanding of how things work in order to troubleshoot them like on site. So I think we need people like that are really knowledgeable of security, of its impact, of where all of this stem from. And I think sometimes you can go through some systems design thinking, and I think it's really key. For me, for example, one principle I apply is anti-fragility, right? We all know what Nassim Taleb has said. So basically, if you want to build a system that will never be broken into, that's not really possible if you have a budget. If I had unlimited money, maybe, right? But security is about mitigating risk. So basically, you have to be able to say that I'm gonna get hacked, right? I will be the target of an attack. My grandma used to tell me that if you find yourself in the savannah in front of a lion, there is no need to panic, because either he's not angry and you will leave, or he's angry and it's done. So I think that's really important for us. So we should not put our CISOs in a position where they are afraid that they will be fired because something is going to go bad. We should assume that, what can I do to be resilient, to be back up in like 30 minutes if I am the target of an attack? And I think that's really important.
That's a perfect kicking off point. So Andreas, let's go to you. You've implemented, and again, I'm going to focus on the multi-cloud component. Okay, so now we're talking multi-cloud and zero trust. Having done this and implemented these programs, what are some things before you actually go to implement zero trust in a multi-cloud that you've learned are critical things that practitioners or those implementing should discover or learn or ask about? What are some of the things that are preliminary that'll save our audience some time later?
Yeah, absolutely. And the framing of multi-cloud, it's important to understand the business driver for it. Is it executive mandate? Is it about cost control and perhaps hedging vendor lock-in? Or in case of the government of the United Kingdom, the regulator mandates the banks that they are not to put all their cloud investments on a single provider. So there's a policy of many clouds, not just multi-cloud. Now, in practice, it's not efficient nor effective to deploy an application, the multiple services that encompass a single application onto different cloud providers. Database replication is already hard to do so across multiple regions within a single provider. Now doing so across between Google and AWS is much, much harder. So in practice, the use case for multi-cloud is one of failover, more so, and understanding also there's the old adage of like, people don't quit their jobs, they quit their bosses. In the developer world, the equivalent of that is developers don't quit their jobs. They quit the stack they don't like working with. So understanding the company culture, understanding the organizational skill set, the native interfaces that they're familiar with. Ideally, you want to opt for open source abstractions that provide you portability and flexibility. So you don't need to toil on native specific interfaces, and you can elevate and reason holistically about your compliance and regulatory objectives without being tied to the specific IAM semantics or schema. That's on one hand. On the other hand, understanding what are the milestones and breakthrough points. We see organizations that are down the journey 5 years, and for all the time they spent on it, they have very little to show. Almost an impedance mismatch. For all they put in cloud native technologies, there hasn't necessarily been a breakthrough moment at the time of coming in and saying, is the system zero trust or not, and attempting to do a zero trust assertion. for the fact that there is no means to say with certainty, these are the subjects, these are the objects in this distributed system at a very fine-grained level in a canonical way. So the inability to express that graph of dependencies of these are the actors and their relationship to one another, for the fact of having overlooked a service identity. There's been a lot of talking about spiffy tray as the underpinning of identity within Istio, understanding that a technology like Istio is not only a precursor, but an enabler to doing true zero trust. And also understanding that it's not all in. You need to rationalize security is, or should be, commensurate to the assets you're trying to protect, to the risk profile of those assets. And that if the mandate is MTLS everywhere, or given controls of a particular standard, that you should rationalize off the threat model, understanding like, well, these are the assets that a foreign intelligence service would be after. Let's protect those first. How would they try to get in? What are the compensating controls? What are custom controls you would need to design for that? Down from there, you'd move on to, well, these other systems are low-hanging fruit. There's other systems, the cost of enabling them as zero trust or enforcing zero trust is insurmountable and may not be that necessary. So rationalizing that can help inform a better strategy where you can showcase outcomes and wins to the business, which ultimately builds coalition and accelerates organizational change and embracing new technologies more rapidly.
Yeah, I mean, the way you covered it, Andreas, where you are almost implicitly asking, do you really need to do multi-cloud, I think is a pretty interesting upfront question. I mean, we have folks attending from the government and from non-government, and having worked in the government, I know sometimes it's not really up to you. You know, it goes through procurement. You're told, hey, you have to use these 3 cloud entities for different parts of it, and okay, off we go, you know. It's probably never seamless to use multi-cloud. It does actually add an identity component. I think a lot of the questions you asked after that are really critical in the planning process. Now, Desiree, if I come back to you, you talked about anti-fragility. I think that's an important concept. Do you mind walking through that a little bit in terms of how do you think through anti-fragility? What are some more details that you bring to that conversation when you're trying to balance anti-fragility, zero trust, and budget? I mean, we have budget. That was an important concept here. How do you prioritize those things when you've been implementing in the private sector, you know, and what lessons can you bring?
That is a really, really interesting question. So I'm going to build off what Andre said, caring about the outcomes, right? So we know monitoring as gathering metrics on different components of a system, you know, when it's working fine or not. And I would define observability as a superset of monitoring, right? And I think observability is really focused on the outcomes. And one way to see this is that security sometimes is not visible to end users, right? If you go on a website, on a platform, and if it's slow or the design is really awful, you know, the customer will know this, right? We know that customer engagement drops with, let's say, how slow a platform is. But how do you know, as a user, that this website has like 1,000 CVs not patched, and this one has only 10? You don't know, right? Of course, if the site is down, that's something that will translate into something more visible. But to come back to your question, Justin, I think we need to start caring about outcomes. And anti-fragility is that it's not that I want to build the most secure site. I want to be able to survive and to be stronger after something happens. Like they talked about the Hydra, right? It has many heads. It doesn't care if a head gets cut off because 2 heads will pop up, right? So it's not defending against, it's actually absorbing shocks. And I think that's one way to see it. So you need to include versatility, you need to include diversity, and one thing that is really key concept is something they call requisite variety. So it's basically say that a system needs to be complex and versatile enough to be able to survive in environment. Another way of seeing this is like arrows and quivers. So if you have 5 adversaries, you need to have at least 5 arrows, right? So a system that you build, you need to be able to say that my goal right now is I want to be able to have business continuity, and I want to be able to only lose like half of my servers in case of an attack. So it's not like I want my developers to commit 10,000 hours. No, it's really more focusing on the outcomes. And the way we do this at IdeaCrew really is to have a security program. And the way sometimes we see this is it's not what you don't know that will get you into trouble. It's what you think you know that is not true. And I'm paraphrasing Mark Twain, actually. So in the security world, it's like, what are the assumptions that a builder has made that are not true, that I can exploit to put the system in an unexpected state, and then I can do what I want. So it's really knowing your system, it's really caring about the outcome, and of course you have to implement, compliance. Like we have to abide by something called MARSI 2. It's for a state-based exchange market, but it's really coming from NIST SP 800-53. And I think there are a lot of standards that you can use. And the NIST Center of Excellence, I think, for cybersecurity has some really good tools and starting guide and all. But what is key is understanding your goals, your outcome.
Yeah, Desiree, that makes a ton of sense. And let's take a single goal and outline. So let's imagine, Andreas, that we talk about threat modeling as a goal. How do you think about, and I'm sure you've done this in some of your implementations, how do you think about threat modeling for Zero Trust?
Our guiding principle is threat-driven design.
Do you mind repeating that again?
Our guiding principle is threat-driven design.
Okay.
So we have posted a philosophy that is threat modeling Zero Trust, and it parts off from, as Zach Butcher was talking earlier, acknowledging the existence of a malicious actor and the strong likelihood that that malicious actor already lives inside your network. But here's an important distinction. We should not undermine that malicious actor. That malicious actor is a very intelligent adversary. And that intelligent adversary with limited time and resources, they're going to try to get the most bang for the buck. So they're not going to be running around in circles looking for low-hanging fruit. They're going to have done their own assessment, their own threat model, figuring out where can they break through. For the history buffs and the audience, I like to talk about the Maginot Line, the network of fortifications that the French had constructed facing the German border. Spent what would be the equivalent of billions of dollars today. Castles, walls, underground tunnels, trenches, but there were deficiencies in the line. Not many, there were a few. There was one particular section that wasn't fortified, and that's where the Operation Thunderbolt pulled through, the Blitzkrieg. And the world of cloud native and the world of Zero Trust, we spent a lot of time in sophisticated defenses. but there's an imminent risk of blurred and broken lines of defense. So parting off, well, what is it that we're trying to build? And practice what will go wrong, what can go wrong, what will go wrong, based on offensive security thinking and penetration testing, discovering those weak sections, the vulnerabilities, the deficiencies, enumerating the threats, producing a list, exhaustive list of controls. Some of those controls may be out of the box. Some other controls we may need to customize. And from there on, circulating that, evangelizing that, making sure it's not only security and compliance engineering, but when people are in the boardroom or the equivalent to the boardroom in the federal sector, helping understand that these are palpable threats. And these are not just about vanity numbers of CVE counts. And for instance, rationalizing that it's better to deal with 100 CVEs that each gets patched within a day than a single unpatched vulnerability for 100 days, for instance. And turning it back analogous to what there is in the world of availability and reliability engineering, of service level objectives and agreements across the different stakeholders and factions, turning that threat model and assets produced from the threat model report, attack trees, the different tables enumerating the threats, the tables enumerating the controls, using those assets to make better informed decisions. What is acceptable risk, what is unacceptable, and ensuring that issues that are known beforehand do not become victim of other strategic priorities to the organization.
Honestly, that makes a ton of sense. We're at the last few minutes. I want to make sure, if there are any questions, please feel free to ask. And I'm gonna add one item just as a thing I'm seeing from the private sector for everybody in the concept of zero trust. It's been super interesting for me, and it's about the progress for zero trust moving from access to a data to systems, networks, applications, and other, but moving it from that to use of data for different purposes. This is one of in my view, one of the harder issues coming, and it comes up in my field of privacy, because in my world of privacy, you can be perfectly permissioned to access data, but if you use it for another purpose, you've got a big problem. And this is where I think a lot of where zero trust is going to be going. I'll give you two examples, and again, please, if there are questions, raise your hand. What's that? Oh, terrific. Great, we'll come to this. So, we're seeing in the private sector that one of the most valuable things that a company has is knowledge of who merely lands on your website, okay? Just think about that. Just the knowledge of who lands on your government website, what that device is, who that is incredibly valuable information. Monetizing that, sharing that, and with whom you have permission to share it, is coming into the zero trust model. And that's also true as you've seen the rise of generative AI. People are taking all kinds of information that they have access to, and they're putting it into generative AI models, right? Were they allowed to do that? Very few people are asking that question. Can you trace the use of that data when it was put into that model? Who knows? But this use question, I think, is going to be very important.
Yeah. Can you even preemptively put guardrails in place so the system never overreaches?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You shouldn't trust the generative AI to begin with, right?
Exactly. We have about a minute, so I'll just pick one, and I'll just do the first one. Moving beyond multi-cloud, can either of you weigh in on security on multi-SaaS, which seems to be the way the industry is evolving? Do either of you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Andres touched on the multi-cloud because sometimes it's a requirement, right? And there are many ways to do that. So you can have your infrastructure as cloud be cloud agnostic, right? You can build your software. If it's microservices, containers, you don't care actually which cloud it is, as long as you make sure that you use components that are generic enough with providers that work as you want. So in terms of multi-SaaS, I would start by saying, what is the need of that first, right? Because if there is a need, then absolutely you can distribute your services as you want into different clouds. But the key question I want people to remember is that what is the need? How does it make you more secure? How does it make you more resilient? If it does, then it's worth investing the time and resources and money to do so. If it does not, then I think we need to be able to ask pertinent questions to people who issue that, absolutely. And me, coming from NIST, I have done that sometimes. Now I am on the other side of the table, right? So there is this standard. Let's say you have audit and accountability AU2, right? And they said, why do you need to do that? Because in AU6, they say you need to analyze your audit and accountability logs, right? So that makes sense. But if that wasn't there, it's up to us to complement that or to ask questions and say that if this is really what we need to do, how do we go to attain the same results via different pathways? Yeah.
Well, terrific. Well, listen, we're out of time. Terrific discussion. Please thank our panelists.
Justin?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciate it.